Hiya and welcome to this week's episode of Inside Property Development, where I'm speaking with Hayley Farnell from Samsara Ecology. We are talking about bats, badgers, newts and biodiversity net gain, which if you are out there trying to deal with planning applications, will know are all massive issues, particularly the BNG, particularly on small sites. So this is a really interesting one. It's all a bit complicated, probably end up with smoke coming out of your ears, but it is worth a listen. So please do that and don't forget to like and subscribe. Hiya and welcome to this week's episode of Inside Property Development, where I'm speaking with Hayley Farnell from Samsara Ecology. Hello, Hayley.
Hello.
Thank you for coming.
No worries. Thank you for inviting me.
So I like you because I've liked some of your posts on LinkedIn where you've been sort of talking in a bit of a no bullshit way about some of the problems and issues around BNG in particular, which interestingly, I've noticed that not a lot of people in the know that you would expect to reply have replied, i.e., you know, you're highlighting big questions and big problems and everyone's like, oh, fucking hell, don't say that, don't talk about that. But anyway, we'll come on to that. But so before we do, give me a little intro, tell me about you, what you do, how you got started and all the rest of it.
I was born in London, grew up in South East London, with my mum, my sister, grew up around Greenwich and went off to university in 2000.
What did you do?
Environmental Sciences was the bachelor's. I'd always wanted to be a vet, but I wasn't clever enough to do that. So I went through the prospectuses at the A levels and it was called Earth Sciences, the course at the time. And I was like, well, that is the closest thing to working with nature and animals. And that sounds like the way I want to go. So I went into that. It was Greenwich University, but it was the campus in Medway. So I moved down to Kent at that point. And I did that, which was a very odd experience. I was the first one in my family to go to university. So, you know, growing up on a council estate and then being in this sort of middle class sort of world.
I was exactly the same, actually. I was the same as that, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a very, very, very big adjustment. So I did that degree. But when I'd been looking around universities, I remember going to East London Uni campus, and I didn't like the campus or the course, but the lady interviewing me, she said, if anything, do a 4-year sandwich course because everyone comes out with a degree. But if you've got a degree in experience, that will give you a boost. And that stuck with me. So when I started my degree at Greenwich, I took a 4-year sandwich. And so I spent a year in industry. I ended up in Chesterfield doing air quality stuff, working for Castella Stanger, as they were then. I think they got taken over by Bureau Veritas in the end. And I was on a old smokeless fuel site, but they were demolishing it. And I was doing the air quality. I was looking after the monitors and sending off the data and stuff. So I did that for a year. And then I went back to uni. I was doing my course. And we were doing a module on environmental impact assessment. And one of the reports happened to be from Atkins. And I looked on the back and there was the name of the guy that had been my line manager while I'd been at Casella. And I just like, okay, I need a job. I'm going to need a job in a few months. So I emailed him and I was like, hi, Gav. I don't know if you really remember me, but I worked for you for a year. I need a job. My degree's ending. Have you got anything at Atkins? I've seen you've moved there. And he got back to me and he said, of course I remember you. Come in for a chat. So I went in for a chat and he introduced me to the manager at the time and we had the interview and I got a graduate position, which in 2004 was pretty good going, really.
So that was it. So basically, so you've been doing this 20 plus years now?
Yes. Yes, for my sins. So yeah, so I did the air quality assessments. Big, I've done the M25 DBFO, and I've been up to Manchester and monitored around there, and it was never really a strong suite for me. I've always wanted to do something for the environment and things like that. And air quality was just, and as it will fill into probably our conversation later, air quality was a lot of spreadsheets and just doing models in spreadsheets. And to me, I was like, this is just manipulating numbers to say what the client wants. And yeah, so I wasn't very good at it. I wasn't awful, but it wasn't like, oh, I want to do this for the rest of my life. And my friends are in ecology, because the Atkins is a multidisciplinary.
Yeah.
The floor that we worked on had acousticians, ecologists, environmental managers, everything.
Where was that? Not Euston?
No, although I have worked in the Euston offices. No, I was based in Epsom at that point, in the Atkins building in Epsom. And yeah, so I did that, and I wasn't brilliant at it. And sort of as the years went on, I did that for 8 years, and I was like, I don't want to do this. This is not what I want to do. I want to do maybe what they're doing over there, which is going out and looking for birds and bats and plants and things. So I think it's like 2010, 2011. I made it through 2008. I managed to not get laid off like a lot of my colleagues had been. I managed to survive through that. But by 2010, 2011, I was like, no, I've got to change like this. I can't keep on with this. So I first of all, I went off to and become a voluntary police officer, because I thought I wanted to completely change altogether. Didn't like that. And then I went off to the Amazon and did a BTEC in biological surveying techniques. And I come back and they sent off a few applications, and people were like, no, you haven't got the qualifications to be, you haven't got the right skill set to be an ecological consultant. And I was like, oh, what do I need? So I looked up what they were looking for. And everywhere was, at that time, bat license, bat license, bat license, bat license. You got to do stuff with bats. So I looked this up, and the local bat group, because I was in Essex by this point, the local bat group wanted volunteer ambulance drivers for bats that had been found injured. And I was like, well, that ties into my love of animals, and it ties into what I needed experience in. So I contacted them, and they said, come along to the AGM and find out a bit more. So I did that. And I met a lady there who, Gavin was one of the first people in my life that sort of changed how my career was going to be by giving me the job at Atkins. And Jan, the lady I met at Back Care, she's the second person in my life who has directed my career choices and has given me the opportunity. So I met Jan. Sadly, she's no longer with us, but she was amazing. Absolutely amazing.
As a developer, so let's say, I'm looking at a site. How do I know when I should call you in or not? Or what should I be looking out for?
I think the way I try and explain it to people is that what I'm looking for is, in the first instance, is this site suitable for use or shelter by protected species? Now, it's fair enough that people go, oh, but the roof's got tight roof seals on it and blah blah blah. But a bat can get in a gap that's 1 centimetre wide, and with all due respect, I know what goes in a bathroom. I wouldn't presume to know how to plumb one, So, and it's the same thing when I go on a site. I think people just think, oh, I look around and go, oh, is something here, something not here. I'm not. I'm looking for, what's the connectivity? Where am I in the country? Am I in a rural location? Am I in a sub-rural? What do I know about the protected species in this area? Do I know that it's a high newt population? Is it a low newt population? Have I had a license 2 doors down the road? So you bring it in, and then you look at the site and say, is this suitable for protected species? And quite often, the site I was on this morning, it's a garage that they're going to bring down and put a house up. No, the garage is tightly sealed. I checked it. The most they've got in that loft is rats. So, but I can successfully turn around and go, no, you've got no issues there. My opinion is that it's a very low risk that you will commit an offence if you continue with doing your work. Because that's the other thing. What we are looking for in an impact assessment is the applicant's and the developer's risk of committing an offence against the laws that are there to set out to protect the species. So as I quite say often to newer clients and people that know me, I don't expect you to give a shit about the fluffy things. That's what I'm there for. That's what I do my career for. But I have a set of rules that I have to follow that have been set up to protect these fluffy things. So there is certain guidance I have to follow. There are certain stages that I have to proceed with. Now, I know there are arguments that we over-survey, and I know there are arguments for could we just do it with all district licenses? And there are good and bad arguments on both sides. And I don't think a podcast would be long enough to go into all of it. But in terms of when you should get an ecologist in, I think, especially with the BNG now coming out, whenever you've got a site that you want to put in an application for, there are 3 things that I think everybody should get done. Topography, if it's big enough. I mean, if it's a tiny site, let's be pragmatic here. An arborist to come and have a look at the trees, and an ecologist. Because if the arborist and the ecologist finds, well, no, there's no constraints here in terms of that can save you so much time and expense down the road. Whereas a lot of people, not a lot, but maybe a large portion of people buy a site and think, it's okay, we'll do it down the road. And then they start jumping up and down and blaming the bats because it's the 29th of August and you've walked into the site and gone, well, there's a lifted roof tile under there that a bat could get in. And there's there's a tree with woodpecker holes that a bat could go in. I found, there's nesting birds there and there's a pond just over there. You're going to need further surveys. Right, can you get them done next week? No, you've got to wait till spring next year. And then people start jumping up and down on you and blaming the newts and the bats and the badgers. And it's like, well, no, it's a timing issue.
One of my businesses trains other property developers to hopefully do the things the right way. So I tell them about all of this stuff so that they don't come a cropper, drop a massive bollock basically, and which can causes big problems. So what we're talking about here is certain surveys do need to be done, but there is windows when you can do them. Yeah. You can only do them at certain periods. So if someone buys a site or looks at a site, actually, or even comes to a planning application at the wrong time, let's just say September, and all of a sudden everything's just about hibernate or whatever it is, you can't do the survey. So you literally cannot do anything for 6 months.
Yeah.
So, and that just is how it is. And it's important that people know that because it's a big issue and they're complaining. And it's, well, to be honest, you should have known, really.
Yeah. Especially when I was younger. It's not so much now. My husband, who works with me, says I've got a stare. He says you have a presence and they know when they've crossed the line. But when I was younger, I have been on sites so people have literally screamed and shouted at me in the face. I've employed you. You've got to say this. You've got to say that. There's no bats here. How dare you say that? And, when I was younger, that affected me quite a lot and I would get upset and I've walked off site in tears before now. Now I'm a bit older and a bit long in the tooth. If they're getting on my nerves too much, I'll just walk off site and they can go and find another ecologist, of which I would have told everybody in my local vicinity not to touch them. And secondly, it's like, again, it comes back to this. I don't care if you care about the fluffy things, but you will care if you go to knock that down and Mrs. Joe Bloggs that lives down the road knows you've got bats in that building. So she calls the police and you end up in court because it's not me that's going to get a proceeds of crime offence against me. It's you. Because that's what they do now as well, is if you've broken the law, if you have not followed the process and you have destroyed a known bat roost or killed or injured a bat during your works, and the police take you for prosecution and you end up in court and it goes through, it's a proceeds of crime. So if you're building a development, the judge will conclude that all the profit you've made has been made from with a criminal act in process. Therefore, they will take all your profit as their proceed of crime.
That is so interesting. I didn't know that. And importantly, though, just trying to get people to understand what's what and do things the right way, even if they didn't, like say, give a shit about fluffy things, and hopefully, if they're reputable and good people, they would care.
Yeah.
But even if they don't, if someone's just concerned about, well, I want to find a site and I want to get planning permission, they need to know as well. If you're gonna have to do this stuff, so there's no avoiding it. So you might as well do it properly from the beginning.
Yes, yeah. It just makes things so much easier. So I've been doing this for 5 years, and I have a wonderful client base. They are lovely, and I like to think that they like me as an ecologist, because I try to be as practical and pragmatic as possible. And a lot of freelance ecologists like myself are like that. We don't have the time to go on site and tell you need things you don't need, because A, we end up with earache, and B, we've then got to book you in for further surveys, and we're very busy people. So when I go on site, we try and find the best, most practical, pragmatic way to get you through planning whilst being within the laws and the wildlife. And the benefit of that is that I get to protect my fluffy things that I'm trying to protect. And so my clients know that if I turn around to them on a site and go, you're going to need further surveys for bats, we're not going to need to put cameras on that badger set, they know that if I'm saying that, they need to do it, because I've cultivated a relationship with them that they know that if I'm telling them that it needs to be done, it needs to be done. Because if it didn't need to be done, and it was just let's make a couple of extra bucks here, I wouldn't be saying it. And building that relationship up means that when you do get a slightly complicated site, of which you do come across, some are easy peasy. No, nothing here, go for it. In fact, sticking in a nice garden with a few trees is probably going to improve it. And putting up a bird box and some integrated bat box, great, go for it. Whereas some sites, it's like, we're going to have to think about this a bit carefully so we can work together. And having that relationship with them means that they go, okay, Hayley, what do we need to do? Rather than what do we need to do to make this go away, what do we need to do to ensure that we get our building and planning at the end of it? We do it while staying within the law. And the benefit of that is you get your protection of your animals and things like that. And as you say, most people don't want to hurt and injure things. If I put a bat in front of you and gave you a hammer and told you to smash it, most people would go, are you okay?
So I think, God, over the years, I've had bats, badgers, newts. I don't say everything. I'm sure there's stuff that I don't even know about that I haven't had. But I've had most stuff. So, but some people wouldn't have done. They don't know how to deal with these things. Yeah. So let's just say, as an example, someone's got a site. It's got a big old house in the middle, and you or someone comes along and we discover there's a load of bats in the roof.
You have to come up with a mitigation method plan. This is going at first in terms of application that is going to satisfy the local planning authority, in particular the ecological officer. That the mitigation you're going to put in place is going to allow you to do the demolition and that without committing an offence. Normally, that is by, if you've got a protected species on site, that is by getting a derogation licence from Natural England. So you can't get that licence until you've got planning. So at the stage of planning, what you're saying to the local planning authority is we have done our preliminary survey, and we've done our further surveys, and we've found this species on site. And as the ecologist, you go, so what I'm going to do, because I've found a maternity roost of common pipistrelle bats in this gable end of the building, when I write the licence, what it will include in it, but not limited to, is, because you always have to cover yourself, because animals change. Do you know what I mean? You can have a maternity roost for years and then it buggers off. So it includes, but not limited to, sensitive timings. So if you've got a maternity, so if bats will all gather at a certain time of year to have their young, and then they will disperse again. So just because you've got 795 bats in the wall in June, they probably won't be there by September. So you would say sensitively time your development, your construction works. And sometimes if you've got a big enough building, you leave that end alone until we can work on it, and we'll start up this end, whatever way around it goes. So sensitive timing of works, so don't do it when they're most likely to be there. Supervised works, it could be a soft strip. I'm quite often on roofs watching roofers take off roof tiles or hanging tiles and things like that. And there will be a place to put bats during the works. Whilst you find them, you've got to move them out the way. Hence why you get the ecologist involved, because I'm licensed to move bats. Then the compensation of what you need to move in. So that could be boxes, it could be a bat roof. Very occasionally it's a bat house, but it's normally on the type of development size scale that I work on, it's boxes, and maybe a small roof space shared with the normal roof space. That will go to the local planning authority, and then that should satisfy the local planning authority that you've done all the appropriate level of assessment, you've assessed the level of impact, and that you've provided the correct mitigation that is going, and compensation that's going to offset that, and they should grant you the planning. Once you get the planning, that's when the ecologists will apply for a licence from Natural England. And basically what that boils down to is someone like me saying to Natural England, I've got X, Y, and Z species on my site. This is the proposed works. This is the impacts I'm thinking to have. These are the methods that I'm going to use. Now, a lot of roofs are very similar, so there's a standard set of methods in the licence that you tick to. But sometimes you have to be a bit more creative. You send that off, Natural England assess that, and they sometimes come back and go, oh, I'm not too sure about that. Can we have a conversation about this? And we go back and forth. But most of the time with simple things, they go, yeah, that's fine. And then they give you the licence. Basically, a document that says you allowed to derogate from the law. We know that you're going to smash up a roost, which is protected by law. And we know that there's some risk that there may be bats in that building. But we also know that because you've said you're going to do it under this specific method, you're going to avoid the risk of intentionally and deliberately harming, killing, injuring those bats. So if PC Plod comes along whilst you're doing the works, you could point your licence and go, actually, sir, I'm covered. They know I'm doing this. And that's what it does. And then part of that licence is to build them a new home to live in once it's done. So the whole process from beginning to end is to protect the animals and to protect the people and provide the people with somewhere to live and provide the animals with somewhere to live. And that's basically what it boils down to. Unfortunately, it just all gets wound up into this scaremongering of it's going to stop everything. You're never going to be able to develop anywhere. Oh my God, you've got a animal on this site, therefore you will never ever be able to touch it. And that's the bit that's frustrating. That is really frustrating.
Yeah.
But it's just a case of education.
Exactly.
Really.
So the short version, as long as things are done the right way, most of the time things can be moved.
Yeah.
But it's all about doing it properly, basically.
It's about moving them out the way whilst you do your works and then giving them somewhere to live afterwards. And as I said, most people do not want to kill and injure things while they're... I mean, I've been on sites and there's been big burly roofers and they found a bat and they're like, oh, you know, they don't want to hurt the things.
And I know it's similar-ish with newts, isn't it?
It's similar-ish with newts. I'm not as specialised in newts, but yes, it's very, very, very similar. The thing that causes the confusion with newts, I think, is that people go, there's no ponds on my site. And you go, yeah, but there are some within 250 metres. Oh, there's one over the other. But they're not on my site. And it's like, yeah, but newts only stay in a pond when they're breeding. They spend most of their life cycle in terrestrial habitats. And again, it's this, you don't want to injure them or destroy their resting places or shelter during the works. And so we're having, again, to do methods in a way that you can do what you do while we try not to kill things. Now, obviously you get district licensing for newts, which is a little bit more lenient. Some people call it a license to kill. So you can just, you assume there's some newts there. You don't have to do as much trapping and all of that. I think district licensing for newts is successful in some ways and not successful in other ways. Long form licensing for bats is successful in some ways and not successful in some ways. But regardless of all of the pros and cons in either side of it, we have a set of rules, as you say, and that's what we are currently having to follow. And if people just listen to the ecologist and go along with these rules, they will find things are a lot easier to progress. And once you've done it a couple of times, probably a lot easier to budget your time and your money as well. I've got a lot of clients now that if I go, right, we've got bats in this, instead of them going, oh God, that's it, we're all going to be okay, right, yeah, we've put in a bat of money and time just in case of this. And then when I go, oh, you haven't got bats, it's all like, oh, brilliant, an extra bit in the pot.
Badgers
are they're little terrors. I love badgers. So badgers are protected in a slightly different way. So newts and bats are European protected species, whereas badgers are protected by the badger law because people used to chuck the dogs down the sets. So it's a little bit easier in terms of badgers to move them out the way whilst you do the works. You only really have to do a new set creation if you're destroying a main set. Now, on the very few sites that I have, because again, I work on smaller sites, if I've got a large main set, what I try and do is work with the clients, work out, I've got one site that we've worked it out, especially with BNG now as well, where that's the BNG area, that's the creation habitat area. So we've got to close down a couple of the holes, but actually the main set is being kept, and the planting we're doing for that benefits the badgers and it benefits the BNG, and they don't have to go through the whole rigmarole of having to try and build a brand new badger set somewhere on their site. They've got this buffer zone and we're sort of dumping everything we need to in there in terms of what they need for ecology. So that's what I always, and I know quite a lot of my fellow ecologists try and do, is try and find a solution. However, if there really isn't a solution, so I had a badger set where the badgers had dug under a house, but it was up in the fence and didn't have any foundations. So it was like, we need to get these badgers out because we need to do that. I put a license application in. We closed the set and chuck them out because their main set was actually just down the road. They just wanted to live under the warm house. It was only 2 badgers, so we sort of scooted them out, and and then we just had to pin the bottom with a hell of a lot of dig. I think we dug down 1 metre, 2 metres, pinned a load of fencing in, and then backfilled it so that they couldn't. They did try to come back, bless them, but yeah, it's fairly simple with badgers. But again, it's about getting the information as soon as possible.
Okay, so now on to the sort of big one in a lot of ways, BNG.
Oh my gosh.
So for people that don't know what that is, do you want to start from the beginning and you'll explain much better than I could?
So actually, Biodiversity Net Gain is a concept that actually came out when I did my master's in 2011, 12. And it all started with a paper called Making Space for Nature. Findings of that paper was that our habitats and nature spaces was shrinking, and along with that, our ecosystem services, so our water supply, our food, land for food, and all of that. So the concept of biodiversity, no net loss and gain, has been around for quite a long time. And actually, I worked with the first sort of inklings of the assessment back in 2013, 2014, when he had the Warwickshire calculator, which then became the first iteration of the DEFRA metric. What it is it is a spreadsheet-based tool that can be used to work out what was on site in terms of habitat. So if it's, I always say to people, if it's concrete, it's not habitat in terms of the metric. If you can grow something on it, or it has vegetation on it, it's counted as habitat within the metric. So the metric tool is used to see what was there, the baseline, what you're going to create, the creation. It takes one from the other, and that determines whether you've got a net gain or a net loss. And most developments have a net loss at first, and then you've got to get that net loss up to no loss, and then put 10% on top of that. So the idea behind biodiversity net gain assessment is to create a way in which people can design development so that it leaves the habitat better than when they started, which is brilliant. I think everybody would agree that's a great cause. So it was designed by larger consultancies. So the Environment Act came out in 2021, and that contains the regulations that say we have to have a net gain, and you have to use DEFRA's tool to assess that. That's where that all comes from. It kept being set to be released, pre-release, made mandatory. Some LPAs had included it in their local plans already, but it wasn't very stringent. And then February last year, it came out for larger sites, so any sites over 0.5 hectares, but not national infrastructure schemes. And then in April last year, it came out for small sites. The regulations became mandatory for small sites, I should say, which meant that anything that was going to result in the loss of habitat that was 25 metres squared or over 5 metres in length of hedgerow, that would trigger the requirement for requiring a biodiversity net gain assessment to be done by this tool. They brought out the main metric, the statutory metric, which is used by ecologists. And then they brought out the small sites metric, which is meant to be able to be used by a competent person. There is no definition of competent person. And it kind of was bolted onto everything and everyone. So I think when you say you saw my posts on LinkedIn, I think one of my main bugbears is whenever I say about small sites, people automatically jump to me going, oh, well, it's a small sites metric, or you should use a small sites metric.
What's the definition of small sites for the BNG purposes?
So it's anything under 0.5 hectares and over 25 metres squared.
Explain that bit a bit more.
So there are exemptions in the Biodiversity Net Gain. And one of the exemptions, so when you don't need to have it applied, if your development, what you're proposing only affects 25 metres square, so a 5 by 5 metre square area or under, it is exempt. You do not require a biodiversity net gain assessment to be done. Now, 5 by 5 metre squared is not actually very big when you're talking about
Well, I was just going to explain that. So by the time you think about, you've got the footprint of a house, and then you got probably a drive and the, whatever. So that's gone pretty easy.
Yeah. I mean, how big is just an extension on a house?
3 by 5, maybe.
Yeah. So by the time you stuck the new patio out the back of that extension, you're talking about probably needing even for those, although they can be household developments. And again, they come under an exemption. I'm just trying to.
And that would be a small one, by the way. So 5 by 5 is more like it, or even more. So basically, there's not a lot you do it all the time, but I would imagine there's not a lot that doesn't trigger it.
I have done the metric for 6 car parking spaces going into the edge of a football pitch. I've done it for like what people would call weeds. And if there are any ecologists that do listen to this, I'm talking about ruderal vegetation, common nettles, hogweed, what people call weeds. So out the back of an industrial estate where they wanted to extend it, I've had to do it for that. I have to do it very often. In fact, that's what I was doing this morning when I was site visit for houses going into a garden. Now, one of the other exemptions is if you were doing it as a self-build, single dwelling going into a garden, it is exempt. If you as a private developer and it's going to market is a house going into a garden, it is no longer exempt. So you have to do it. Regulations require you to include the baseline in the metric and to get a net gain on top of that. It gives no guidance on how to define these habitats, how to include them in the metrics. There is the user guide that details how you use the metrics, and that does have some guidance in it. The guidance in the user guide says that when you've got a garden, so the area of land that was within a private curtilage is defined as a vegetated garden. Unless it's astroturf or something, then it'd be unvegetated garden. But most gardens, vegetated garden. I can't put anything into the habitat creation tab other than vegetated garden. So you could give me a design of a house with a landscape garden at the back, and that could include 2 trees in it, a pond, some lovely wildflower in the corner, and I've had designs zone things like that, and all I can call that is a vegetated garden. So because of the user guide, if I could add in vegetated garden with a tree and a pond, that would probably offset the loss.
So let me try to explain that
Sorry,
a bit.
I explain this every day. So
it's good.
Like...
I'm gonna try to explain that in lay person's terms in case anyone's not getting it, and obviously if I get it wrong, you can put me straight. Yeah. so let's. And this is interesting actually because I'm particularly about trying to support and encourage smaller developers who almost by definition are going to be developing smaller sites, right?
Yeah.
So and historically, I do all sorts of stuff, but most of my stuff has been within existing urban areas inside settlement boundaries. So I'm not going to develop fields and stuff like that. But historically, one of the things I've done quite a lot of is actually land assemblies, where typically, let's just say, there's a row of 5 houses with massive long back gardens that they don't use. And so you can quite easily get a few houses on that land without detracting from the existing house, and you're still leaving it with a nice garden and stuff like that, right? Now, of course, you're going to have to go and do a baseline survey. You look at all the different habitats within that area, and they've got a score.
Yeah,
depending on what type of habitats they are. By definition, at the very least, the footprint of that house is going to take away whatever is there in terms of green stuff, whatever it might be, So that's obviously going to be a loss.
Yes.
Yeah? Now, I need to replace that loss in biodiversity terms, plus 10% at least. Now, the garden or the rest of the garden might be super horrible, low value, not very nice stuff, right? That hasn't really got any massive biodiversity value. I want to plant some really, nice stuff, ponds, trees, all sorts of stuff. And you're saying based on the small sites metric, none of that counts.
Based on the user guide, that none of that counts. I can only put it as a vegetated garden.
Exactly, which is clearly ridiculous.
Yeah.
And from a small developer's point of view, it's like, well, how the fuck am I ever going to get these little sites to work?
And so what the choice is, and I had exactly the same question asked of me this morning when I was on site. The only choice is to purchase offsite units, fractional units, normally when it comes to smaller sites, of habitat from an offsite unit provider. They are starting to sell more fractional units. They aren't widely available yet, and so it makes things very difficult. And it's also going to be 2 results of it. is going to be very poor, as minimal as possible, as cheap as possible garden design. The offsite units to offset a garden, you can normally do it with other neutral grassland. And so the offsite habitats unit banks that were meant to create a more biodiverse thing become a commercialized product of you just having Fords and you can only get them in black. Do you know what I mean? It's not. If you're developing on a site and you're going to lose a bit of woodland and you're going to lose a bit of scrub and you're going to lose, and you need to offset all of that, then the offsite, what you should try on site first. But when you have to buy from an offsite unit provider, it should be trying to encourage them as well to create habitats that are diverse. But at the end of the day, quite a lot of people are buying this as a new business opportunity. And so they will go, right, so what's most people buying? Oh, they only need to offset gardens. So we'll just buy that grassland field and make it into other neutral grassland.
As you will know and tell us more about, there's like a hierarchy for these things.
Mm-hmm.
In an ideal world, the biodiversity gain should be on site.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and then it's only if for whatever reason you can't provide it on site, then you start looking off site. If that's not even possible, then ultimately there's credits.
Yes.
Which is a sort of super expensive. On the small sites, you can't have it on site.
No.
Which is completely ridiculous. So therefore, a developer is going to have to be forced to pay more to put it off-site somewhere. The stuff off-site is not going to be real high value anyway. From a developer's point of view, there's viability issues because there's a whole load of additional cost. And then you're even less inclined to think, well, wait, now I can't really afford to do anything nice on site because I've had to go and pay to do some stuff that's not really ideal off-site.
Yeah.
So it's all bonkers, really.
It is bonkers, and it's taken an idea that was created that, and I should state, I'm not against biodiversity net gain as a concept. It was developed by larger consultancies, and their experience is larger development. Having been in those meetings in Atkins years ago, I know that if I go into a meeting with engineers, traffic engineers, designers, blah, 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 and I sit and I had a spreadsheet and I went, this number is this number is this red box in this Excel spreadsheet is saying, no, you need to do better. That's a tangible thing that they can grab hold of and they can work with in their design. And they have got enough space, an area within their large development to get that done. And they've got enough people within their organisation to all talk together and make that happen. And so for that type of situation, brilliant tool. It is a much more tangible idea than there may be a bat roost in the middle of that site. It is a way of getting better design for larger sites that hopefully, in a way, improves the biodiversity of that site. And then they took that idea and they went, it's going to apply to everything. And that's where it fails. The world in which you do really large developments and the world in which you do very small developments, my idea, now I know there's different definitions in planning, my idea of a small site is anything from, one house going in up to about 10, maybe 50. Anything larger than that, then you're sort of looking back. And even in terms of ecology, they have different ways. I didn't go out and do sites the size of, say, Northstowe, and look at it in the same way that the site I've gone and looked for this morning, because there are different elements involved, there are different topographies involved, there's different where you are, how they're using that landscape. You're using it at landscape scale or you're using it at a site scale. And so to try and apply a tool that was created for large sites and just create a small sites metric to sort of bolt it on to the regulations doesn't work. It misses all the nuances of the small. It misses the fact that me and you would sit in a meeting together or stand on site together and work out a plan based on that footprint that we are standing on right there, that we can probably see all the boundaries of a tree is worth this value in the spreadsheet, and therefore if it's removed, you've gone down this much and you have to get it up. If you've got a massive site that's got hundreds of trees on, great, that makes it a lot easier to assess. If you've got 2 trees in a garden, that can make a massive difference to how much you are going to have to pay to buy the offset units. And you've got no choice but to buy the offset unit. I've seen a lot of people describe it as a sledgehammer to break an egg. And that's exactly what it is. I'm not against offsetting development. Like, that makes perfect sense to me. I have had some gorgeous landscape designs given to me. And they've gone, oh, is this going to help? Will this help us with biodiversity net gain? And I have to go, it's beautiful, but no, it's not. And they've used, I went on I can't remember what it was, but there was a sort of, they sort of got some people in the industry together, Natural England did, just before Christmas, just try and figure out how this is going. And there was a wonderful landscape architect on there. And she was saying she mainly deals with urban developments. And she's saying the ecologists are always asking for native trees. She said, native trees don't work on the soil type that I've got. It will be dead in 4 years' time if it makes it that far. And and she's going, so why do you get? And we're like, because if it's not native, it doesn't score well. And so instead of using her specialism and the soil specialist's specialism and the ecologist's specialism to go and come together and go, the design that would be suitable for this site, these soil types, this conditions, this environment we're standing in right here, this micro habitat we're standing in, instead we're going to have to go to a tool that's giving it value for whatever reason it's giving it the value, and doesn't take into any considerations the nuances that are around that. It is going to end up a cudgel to which people that don't want any environmental stuff within planning to beat us with. It felt like we just got people coming around to the fact that they will have to do stuff for protected species, and that they were not always excited, but they were like, right, we know this is the rules we're going to have to play. And we just got people coming along with us and going, right, we'll work together. And then I went, oh, now you've got to do this. And now everyone's going, why am I having to pay this biodiversity tax? And never mind that I have to buy this biodiversity tax. Why am I having to have you come here and pay you extra to run a spreadsheet to tell me something that you could have probably told me over the phone? Like, why do you have to run a spreadsheet to tell me, as you quite rightly explained, if you've got a bit of concrete going into something that was green before, you're going to get a loss? And you're like, and the only thing we can say now is because them's the rules. That's the legislation we've been given. I don't have social media. I've only got LinkedIn, and I haven't used it for a long time. And my postings on LinkedIn was triggered last year when it was so much like coming in and people asking. I just sat in the coffee shop with my husband, and I just opened up LinkedIn and I just put a post saying something like, is anyone else feeling this pressure? And the amount of response that I got to that, it was like, wow, actually, I'm not on my own. I'm actually triggered a nerve here. It's not that I hate the BNG. It's not that I think that it should be thrown out baby with the bathwater. But what needs to happen is there needs to be sensible changes made with people in the room who do local planning authority level applications rather than the larger multidisciplinary consultancies, because we're in two different worlds. And the world that I exist in is full of freelancers and small scale ecologists who are cracking under the pressure. I've known at least 2-3 people that have retired. They were near a retirement age, but they were quite happy to carry on with ecology. But it's got so much pressure from they needing to do BNG. They literally went, not doing this, retired. I've heard of other people leaving the industry because they can't cope. A lot of people have said to me in the last year, "Oh, this is good. You must be making top dollar on all of this." And without going into my finances too much, It's coming up towards my end of the year. So far, I've made nearly £20,000 loss on my turnover this year. And that is because of all the time I've spent not doing productive work because I've been on the phone explaining to people how this works and why it works, or mostly dealing with local planning authority officers who are giving knee-jerk reactions.
This is one of the reasons I really wanted to get you on here, because, and it happens a lot in development, this is a classic example of policymakers coming up with stuff and not really realising the actual implications of what it all means. And also then it sort of getting applied in a way that's all a bit computer says no. And it's just worse for everyone. They don't get what they thought they were going to get, you know? And then, of course, you've got local authorities who we all know are massively under-resourced, and this stuff's complicated anyway. Well, the rules say this and you've got to do that, and I haven't got the XYZ report. Who knows for who might hear this, right? The right people will start actually realising that things do need to be had a re-look at, you know?
I hope so. I just find it so frustrating that there are so many of us going through all different types of avenues, writing directly to people, saying it on social media, podcasts, and every time going, this isn't working. Can someone listen to us, please? If you are not congratulating them and telling them how good a job they've done, they just completely ignore it. And the problem is that biodiversity ends up losing out in the end, because I keep saying to people, they are going to end up upsetting the wrong person, who is either a friend or a relative or an MP themselves, or someone that's higher up in the legislative that wants to get a win in a local election, and it all gets baby thrown out with the bathwater. And that would be a shame, because I think that if there were changes, and I don't have the answers to all the changes, but if they were willing to move to meet people where they're at, there could be compromises made that will benefit not only biodiversity, but would also take this pressure off of the industry. Because it can't keep on like this. I mean, I know more about planning in this last year than I ever had to know. I shouldn't need to know about planning any more than you should need to know about the life cycle of a bat, you know. But I've had to learn certain things of why you have a red line boundary, and why you have certain types of applications going, and what's the difference between a householder and a self-builder. I have to know all this so that I can have a conversation with my planners and architects to say, right, we've got this site. I think this is going to be a bit of a problem, or I think this is going to make this a bit tight. So can we do and it's not a subverting the system. It's how can we make this the most pragmatic and proportionate way forward? Because otherwise, this person that just wants to build this house is going to end up with an unviable site. And it's like, well, what does that do for anyone? Because that just makes people cross.
One final little thing, well, that's probably not going to be a quick one actually, but it's worth talking about, because it's another really good example of the unintended consequences of some of this, the implications of this policy stuff is open mosaic.
Oh God. Open mosaic habitat.
Just explain that, and we'll talk about that a little bit.
Open mosaic habitat is a designation given to sites that typically tend to be brownfield sites, metric or interlocking patches of habitat.
So, in planning, I'm sure you know this, there is quite rightly a big push for brownfield first, right? Yeah. Developing previously land. You shouldn't really be, certainly not developing in the countryside and fields and all the rest of it, if we can help it, yeah? So, and some of this, let's just make one up. It might be an old factory site that sat there vacant and empty for 20 years. And as a result, also it's become overgrown, I'm just going to say. Lots of stuff that look like weeds to me, but of course I'm no expert. and it's just, people can probably imagine it. It's mainly hard standing. It's mainly concrete and buildings, but you got little clumps of bushes and weeds and stuff like that. Would that be an all right description?
See, that is the description that everyone is applying to open mosaic habitats. But that is a brownfield site with some scrub on it and some ruderal on it. And a real open mosaic habitat is quite a rare habitat type. You're talking about maybe a quarry that was disused, and so you've got, the old ponds of sort of flooded a bit more, and you have, a bit of grassland popped up with some new successional woodland come in and some scrub and things like that. And the mosaic means that you get lots of different subspecies within it, and you have the full life cycle for an insect or an amphibian or something like that. And whilst you can get open mosaic type habitats on brownfield sites, and disused, therefore brownfield sites are most likely to be developed into open mosaic. I mean, the amount of people that I've seen that from, of, this site's become unviable because they've said it's a open mosaic habitat, and I've looked at it and gone, that's just that used to be a factory and now it's become overgrown. So this is the other problem you've got with it, is that people doing the classifications of the baseline habitat are maybe not as experienced or qualified to map these habitats, or they've understood the descriptions within the UK HABs in a way that's not quite right. I mean, I would not call myself I have friends that are botanists. You can show a plant and they would give you the Latin name for it, where it grows and everything. I am not that. The same happens with grassland. The amount of people that say, it's other neutral grassland, and you're standing on a site and you're like, this was a field this was a horse paddock. The ground is full of fertilizer and things. It's not got neutral soil, so how are you going to get another neutral grassland on here? The soil type's wrong. Like, this at best is moderate grassland of, maybe good condition. And if you read if you look at the definitions within the UK HABs for that, and you really look at it and make an understanding of that, then you're like, yeah, that's, I would go with this one and not that one. And so the problem is this has been dumped on ecologists, and some ecologists are more species focused because that's what they had to focus on. And so this habitat stuff, whilst they have a general idea, so for myself, I know my limits. So I have had fields where I've walked into and I've gone, this grass looks a little bit more interesting to me than my usual definitions. And I get someone in who I know is very good at botany to come and tell me. Now, sometimes they tell me and go, no, Hayley, it's not as great as you thought it was. But sometimes they go in and go, yeah, actually, I found this and I found that. We've got so much pressure on the industry, especially the maybe larger companies, to just send out the juniors, go and map the site. Someone was saying to me the other day, could you do it by drones? And you're like, no, because the definition between a grassland is what's growing on it. And I can't see that from a drone. I sit there in a field with a quadrat and I have my face down in it and I'm looking. Maybe not certification, but a definition of what a competent person is. Because even ecologists aren't competent at all of the habitat definitions. And this is where we're getting the open mosaic habitat, bringing it back to that, coming in a lot, because people have an image in their head of what it is without really looking at what the definition of an actual open mosaic habitat is. So I would suggest, and if any ecologists watch this, I might end up with earache. I would suggest, if you've got a habitat and the ecologist has come on and has said, I think this is an open mosaic habitat, if they are a botanist and an expert in habitat creation and you are confident in their ability for habitats, then great. You've definitely got the right person to help you. Maybe they're not as experienced as stuff. Maybe get a second opinion, which I know I am going to get beaten up about. But there are certain habitat types that are beyond your general practitioners necessarily level of experience. And I think I think that also comes with experience. I mean, I do the same with, if I go onto site and it's got, and I've got to deal with birds, they're all little brown jobs to me. They're day flying bats. I don't name my birds. For anything from common stuff, I'd go and get my friend who is a specialist in birds to come and do it. If I've got a ditch, I know there's water vole in it, that's as far as I go. I have a friend who's a specialist in water vole, I'll get her in on it. And so I think it's about us also knowing our limitations of where we can go, and not blanket applying habitats just because you're pressured to get the biodiversity net gain done. And also, a lot of that comes from being pressured from the local planning authority officer, who in a lot of cases really isn't experienced. And so they're going, well, I think it's this. And I've had one site where they've gone, well, I think your baseline is wrong. I think it's this. And I've pushed back and gone, no, it's not that. The soil type's not right. This is this X, Y, and Z of why. And I've spelt out to them. And I sometimes think ecologists get a bit scared of pushing back and going, no, I've stood on site. This is what's there. This is why I'm saying this. And this is my baseline. And you do get a lot of computer says no answers. You know, I think the other thing that drives me nuts is in part of the regulations, if a site has been cleared when you get to it, or deemed to be cleared when you get to it, but it hasn't got permission to have been cleared. So if you've got a site that already had planning permission on it and then you go to put a new application in, your baseline is what it was as you walk on site. Whereas if I go to site and it's been cleared and they didn't get permission for that
but obviously this is interesting actually, because I've got one of these.
Yeah.
And but it's got an implemented consent. Weirdly, for a property developer, I'm really into furry things. I'm really anti chopping trees down. I think I hardly ever chopped trees down in 40 years. And my site was old lock-up garages. There was, which I've demolished, and I've actually gone and tied up a couple of gardens next door to make a slightly bigger site. Basically, clear that site pursuant to my extent planning permission, which I can do, can't I? I'm just building out the part permission, and then I'm going back for a couple of additional bits.
Yeah, because you've already got that permission and you've done the works under that permission, then that's your baseline as you walk onto site.
So just to explain a bit more for people, but of course, just in case there's anyone out there thinking, oh, well, I'll just go and strip the site, you can't do that.
Don't do that. People do not take anything else from this conversation other than the fact of get the ecologist in as soon as possible and do not touch the site. Because the thing is if I walk onto a site and there is bramble there and there is trees there and there is this and this, I can map that more accurately. I can also determine the condition of that tree. Now, condition assessments within the biodiversity metric affect the scores massively. If a tree isn't there because it has been felled, I have to, in accordance with the guidelines, I have to put the highest condition on that tree. Now, if that tree when it was standing was actually of a poor condition in terms of my condition assessment, which is not the same as an arb assessment either. So an arborist might see a tree and it thinks it's rubbish. An ecologist into their condition might see it as moderate. But that's probably a different podcast. I can go in and determine that condition. I'm going to give you a more accurate picture. There are some rules when it comes to gardens. So if your site is a garden, like you said, you got a garden site. So if I've got two trees, one is what I define as a small tree, so has a diameter at chest height of less than 30 centimetres, greater than 7.5 centimetres. That's a small tree. And say I have a moderate sized tree or medium sized tree, which is greater than 30 centimetres. I think it's less than 70 centimetres, something like that. In my baseline, I have vegetated garden and I have one tree. Because in terms of rules in a garden, and this is only gardens, I don't have to count small trees as separate from the vegetated garden. So if I go into that garden and you've chopped down both trees, I still have to count the one tree. But if from the aerial that canopy makes that small tree look bigger, I'm probably going to end up counting two trees on top of the baseline. And as I said before, I'm not allowed to plant trees in gardens. So if you remove a tree from a garden, I can't then replace it in the garden. Even if you put it on drawings, it doesn't count anymore. The best thing is to leave them there. And I've got a site actually, and they've got a conifer, and they're like, oh, we'll just get rid of it. No, let me get there with my tape measure and measure it. And then if it's a small tree, do what you like with it. If it's a medium tree, maybe we need to figure out a way of doing this development where you keep the tree, because the score on that is going to be quite high. And also, the metric is that you have to get the trading rules. It's the easy way. If you lose a tree, you replace it with a tree. You lose grassland, you replace it with grassland. That is of better quality. You can only, in your habitat creation, ever put small trees. If you lose a large tree of medium, moderate condition, you normally need upwards of about 11 to 20 trees to replace that one tree.
Wow, really? Wow.
And offsite providers don't have a lot of individual trees either. So I've had quite a few houses going into a garden and they've taken out the tree. And that was like it's gone from something that would have been 0.02 units that had to be purchased to something like 0.4 units that had to be purchased. So it's gone from maybe 1.5, 2 grand to tens grand. So it makes a massive difference. So as tempting as it is to clear the site so no one can see anything, don't do it.
Okay, all right. Well, look, that's as good a place as any to wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming in.
You're welcome.
As people can probably gather, it's complicated stuff. And it also makes developers want to retire, not just ecologists. So, but it is what it is. If you are in the industry, maybe you can tag someone, share this, get it out there, because the sooner, the powers that be understand this stuff and can start thinking, oh yeah, blimey, and understanding that doesn't really work, then hopefully things can be got a little bit more sensible for everyone. So thanks, Hayley, again, so much for coming in. You out there, please remember to like, subscribe, share, and tell your friends, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for tuning in to Inside Property Development. Please remember to like and subscribe. Do join us every week where we'll be speaking to house builders, developers, experts, planners, and everyone involved in trying to get more much needed housing created the right way. We'll learn together how we can collaborate rather than fight, and by working together, we can all help create better places, spaces and homes, and a much more beautiful world.